Hey, welcome to this week's YouTube Live. Pastor Nick here, and joined once again by Pastor Mike.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Hey,
Go Broncos.
our first question is about your shirt.
Yeah. Well, some of us have hope, faith, you know.
Did you get that recently?
Oh, no, I've had it in my closet for a while.
You just came out of the closet.
It came out of the closet. I think it was like I felt like I could actually wear it in public now.
Wow.
Since we finally made the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely a fair weather fan, I guess, when it comes to the Broncos. But
Are you? Oh, not me. I was in a really bad mood after that loss to what was the one they lost, the Bengals. I was so bummed out.
that
It
was
on
such a good
Saturday
game,
night.
though. That was a great game. So,
all right, who do you think wins this weekend? What's your prediction?
Well, I think Buffalo takes it, but I don't think it's a blowout. I mean, they're favored by 9 points, the Vegas spread, so to speak, which is kind of supposed to be a blowout. But I think the Broncos defense shows up, and I think it's kind of like the Bengals game. And I think maybe Josh Allen's experience kind of takes the day at the end, kind of like what Joe Burrow did. But
all right, so what do you think?
I don't know.
What do you think their percentage chances of winning?
35%.
Oh, I was gonna give them 40.
Okay,
I'll give them 40.
40.
All right. Hey, glad to see some people tuning in. Josh Witt, we see you there, and we see John and Patty McCartney. She doesn't watch football. That's why you watch this stream, so you can find out what's going on with the football.
And that's all you need to know. The Broncos may or may not lose.
Yeah. But here's what I would tell anybody watching. They're playing at 11 o'clock, which means you have two options. One option is you come to the 9:15 service. The other option is that you watch it on delay, or you just miss the first, I guess, half.
Yeah.
But you should just come to 9:15 service. That's what you should do.
Yeah, this is going to reveal some idols in our church.
Might. Yeah.
So what people value.
Everybody started the year off so well, coming to church, and then there's a football game.
Yeah.
And now they're being put to the test.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
What do you do when your faith is put to the test? All right. Also, we have TK Cito. That could be either of the Citos, and we're glad that you're joining us. Josh says he's from Cleveland. He's never had a team to watch growing up until now. Hey, congratulations. Yeah, you joined us at a good time because the last 9 years were very hard.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Mike, what are we talking about today? We got some questions. Hey, by the way, this is the show where we take your questions that you have sent in. Some people send them in to through email. You can send them to info@whitefieldschurch.com. You can go on my website, nickcady.org, and you can use the button there for submitting a question, suggesting a topic. All those will get to us in different ways. However you want to send the questions, find a way to send them. There's also a form on our website, whitefieldschurch.com, where you can do that. We'd love to hear your questions. But also, if you're joining us live, just write it in the chat. We'd love to answer questions that you have about God and the Bible. We've got 6 or so questions that were sent in ahead of time. So depending on how long we take to answer those, we might have it. We definitely will fill this time, but we'd love to have some questions while you are watching. John and Patty asked me, what kind of drink do I have? Well, thankfully, my drink has the name of the drink written on it. It says espresso.
Espresso, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm drinking. It's an afternoon espresso. That's what I'm doing.
I probably said espresso so I can think on my feet with these questions.
Yeah, I like it black. That's the way I like it. All right.
All right. Well, let's just start off, I think, with, we're in this current series called 7 Churches of Revelation, and we are going into week 2. And it's just great. I've heard a lot of feedback. People just really dialed into this particular series that we're headed into. I think there's a few things to think about. One is that Jesus only commends 2 of the 7 churches, which is, if you're going into a series about these 7 churches and what Jesus cares about, things like that, and only 2 of them are commended, that means that we're going to be learning a lot of things, and there's going to be a lot of cutting to the bone and getting to maybe twisting, getting us to think through some things that we really need to deal with. So But some of the questions we have today deal with that. And I think you and Pastor Stephen had a great conversation on for the sermon extra. If you haven't seen that, it was posted last night. And just kind of talking about, we talked about the 7 ages, like the 7 churches representing the 7 like ages of time, and how, ways of, people have used that to look at, what era are we living in? Are we now in the church, the church age of Laodicea, or what it may be? And I think that's just something worthwhile for you to check out. But one of the questions that comes today is that, what does, the present day events mean for the church today? So when you were thinking of the 7 churches and the things that Jesus is writing to them, what are some of the present day events that we are looking at today? How do we think they kind of play into this kind of prophetic picture?
Yeah, I see Patty's writing a little bit on here about the eras that were looked at in Revelation 2 and 3. And that was going to be something I brought up now. So I'll just do that. One of those is that, there's like 2 main ways of interpreting these letters. And one of them is the primary. I mean, even those who do the second one, they do the first one too. And so what they are is, one is looking at these as historical churches to which Jesus gave messages that applied to their situation back then, and which also can be applied, the point can be applied to us as Christians living today. That's the primary. Everybody does that. Everybody recognizes that that's a good way to interpret these and apply them. The second one is a little bit more like questionable. Not everybody is on board with it. And we gave some of the reasons for and against it. I think kind of with our sermon extra, we came down against it being like a dogmatic or like really strong thing, more like saying it's an interesting take. It's helpful if it helps you get a better grasp of certain eras in church history from a Western perspective primarily. But there are some significant issues with it. Like I'm not going to call them problems, they're just issues. Like, for example, different churches in different parts of the world are going to find themselves associating with different churches in the book of Revelation more than others, not just in different part of the world, but they're going to find themselves even within our state, even within the hearts of the individuals who make up that congregation, is going to make you associate or find commonality with the issues that are being addressed in these letters. And that could be within one church. It could even be, within one city. It could even be within one church. Some people are going to be like, you know what? That's me and my friends. That's my family. That's me. I'm that guy,
Well, think about the church in China, right? They would certainly, with the church in Smyrna, they would say, that's us. That's definitely us. We are going through tribulation. They're throwing us in jail. We are, the words of Jesus, that's what we want to hear. They would, they would say, that's us,
Totally. Yeah. Whereas like maybe the American church in some parts of it, but not all parts of it, right? Because you have like people living in like different worlds of Christianity in some different groups, right? Like with your old mainline churches that have gone very compromised, you have things about that in these letters. But then, with the evangelical churches, like I said, our church would probably be kind of a lot like the church in Ephesus, where Jesus would probably commend us for our faithfulness to the scriptures. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, do we have love? You know? And so, I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So what does it have to do with modern things? Well, these letters don't really deal with a whole lot of modern issues in direct terms, but maybe in broader terms. Okay. So for example, Smyrna is talking a lot about persecution. Now, there are some ways in which Christians in our place and time probably do deal with some persecution. Specifically, the persecution that they were facing had to do with being excluded from trade unions. And that was a really big deal because, like, let's say you're a stonemason and you can't get a job working with the stonemasons because all the stonemasons in town are in a union. You can't be in the union because you refuse to offer incense to the emperor. That's a real thing that happened, and it affected people. What's really interesting about Smyrna is that we know historically Smyrna was a very wealthy city, and yet Jesus tells the Christians there that he says, I know your poverty. So how do you live in a wealthy city and all the Christians are poor? Well, it's because he says, I know that you have been slandered. And that word slander, there's two words that are used for slander in the Bible. And in 1 Corinthians 18, both of them are used to describe the situation of the Christians at that time. And the two are, one is like spreading malicious gossip, like just like trying to damage somebody's reputation. That's the way we generally use it today. But there was also an official form of slander. Slander would also be used for bringing official accusations against Christians. And that happened there in 1 Corinthians 18, where it says that they went to the magistrate and tried to bring official charges against the Christians at that time. And we know that exact thing happened in Smyrna because in 155 AD, Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, meaning like the head pastor of the community of Christians there in Smyrna, he was burned at the stake. And it was because a charge was brought against him, which was accurate, that he refused to offer incense to the emperor. And he was an old man at the time. And they tried to plead with him, man, just do it. You don't have to believe it. Just do it. And we'll let you go. And he had this famous saying, he said, 86 years I've served my Lord and he's never harmed me. How could I do this to my Savior who loved me? And then he says, you fear the fire that will last for a moment, but you should fear the fire that will never be quenched, which seems to be almost even an allusion to this letter that Jesus talks about, where he talks about eternal damnation. Okay, so point being, what does it have to do with things? Well, there is persecution in the world today. I saw a statistic from this is probably at least 10 years old at this point, but it was showing statistically that Christianity is the most persecuted faith globally. Now, the way that we experience that persecution in our lives, it might be by, bias or by being treated prejudicially in friend groups. It's not going to be on the same level, though, as brothers and sisters in Iran or places like that, where personally I have had experience with people who experience that level of persecution, and I'll tell some stories about it on Sunday. So anyway, what does it have to do? Well, I think that another thing that's talked about in a lot of the letters as we're going to go on is compromise. And does compromise happen today? 100%. Yeah. So it's understanding these things that are addressed and then applying them in our setting, in your life, where the place where you live and the things you're dealing with. Okay, so one thing you mentioned, you said only 2 of them are commended. I would kind of dial back on that and say, well, I think actually 6 of them are commended. Only 2 of them are not criticized.
Not criticized, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
But even the ones who are commended, it's kind of like the what do you call that when you go to the compliment sandwich? Let me start with the good thing, and then I'm going to tell you what I really want to say. Yeah. I mean, I think he really did want to say that.
Yeah, I mean, all the letters have a specific kind of way that Jesus writes and structure that and most of them start out, except for one, it doesn't start out with any kind of commendation, and is not the church of Laodicea. No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's Laodicea.
Yeah, they don't get nothing good. Yeah, the only good thing is that they're not completely cold. I guess, which is not good because Jesus still says basically, "I'm disgusted by you."
Yeah,
which is not good.
So, keeping with that, within that theme, kind of looking at the church's revelation eras, I did want to ask a question, like, what do you think is the difference between the eras that, that some might take away from an interpretation of these 2 chapters and dispensations?
Yeah.
Because some people might mix those up.
Yeah, so dispensationalism is, is popularized by a guy named Scofield. And he wrote this thing, this
Scofield Study Bible. Yeah.
And okay, so dispensationalism, sometimes I find people who reject the idea of dispensationalism, but they still don't reject the idea of dispensations, right? A dispensation is a period of time in which God primarily acted or dealt with people according to certain situations. So like you had the period before the law, right? You had the period of Adam and Eve before sin came into the world. That's a distinct period of time. Then when sin came into the world, there's a different period of time where God's dealing with people in a particular way. The law has not yet been given. And so how did God deal with people during that time when the law wasn't given? It doesn't mean that he saved them in a different way. It just meant that his interactions with them were characterized by different things. And so there are 7 dispensations that Scofield laid out, and they've been kind of generally adopted by dispensationalists since that time. I don't have them right here in front of me, but I know that's one of them. The age of innocence was the time prior to the fall. We don't know how long that period was. Then you have the age after that, prior to the law. You have the time of the law, right? When God gave the law. You have a time characterized by prophets, exile. Then you have the New Testament period. You have the time that we're in right now, which even the Bible itself, you could make a case, and probably should, that we're in a distinct period of time that began on Pentecost and will end with the second coming of Jesus. That's a period of time, a dispensation, not the same thing as 7 eras of church history. That's different.
Right.
But I would say that view of Revelation 2 through 3 is generally also held by dispensationalists and was, what do you call it? It was espoused by Scofield himself, or at least alluded to, and people took Scofield's allusion to that. It's like a remark he made in his study Bible, and people took that and like played it out or built it out. Yeah. Josh said, "Here come the charts." That's right. I don't have any charts on me.
Yeah.
I do have a whiteboard, but it's over in the corner. We're not going to be able to use it.
I'll just start to do.
Don't draw on my wood.
Yeah,
it doesn't come off.
I'll use a knife.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to jump into Patty's question here, because I think that kind of fits in with our theme here. Before we move on to this other question, if the rapture occurs and an individual is asleep or has lost his first love or has become lukewarm, will they still be raptured? Are these warnings so we would continue to be effective?
Okay, so let's answer that question. If you're asleep, right? Because there's this one letter that tells the church to wake up, right? You have the reputation of being alive, but you're dead. Okay, the question, they were dead, but were they believers still? Were they? What does it mean that they're dead and they need to come alive? Does it mean that they have lost their passion? Does it mean that they have lost their focus? Or does it mean that they literally are no longer adopted, redeemed sons of God? I would lean towards the former. I think it's that they've lost their passion, their focus, and they've lost sight of what really matters. Very similar in some ways to the Old Testament prophets. You know, sometimes the Old Testament prophets would say these kind of things like, wake up, come on, let's go. And yet those people were still the people of God, right? Like, so anyway, that would be my answer. Here's my short answer. I think that those people would still be raptured. I think that losing your first love, or a better translation of that, by the way, is the one that's used in almost all the common translations nowadays, like ESV, NIV. It says, you have abandoned the love you had at first, love for God and love for people. And yeah, I mean, you might lose your lampstand. That'd be a question. Do you lose your salvation? I personally don't believe that you're losing your salvation. I think it's speaking to the church and saying you will lose your witness as a church. You will cease to be a church in my mind. So, I think that we continue to be effective, that we would keep our focus on the right things. No,
I think a great answer. I'd throw in just like a real world example that might, something that you might, encounter, is that I used to have a young guy, and I think I've told this story before, but I remember I was working with him. He was serving the church. He's part of the children's ministry and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he was on fire for the Lord. And then one day we were helping a friend move, and he basically came and told me that he wanted to go into the world and see what it's like. He wanted to get into making porn films, and he wanted to live life and go out. And his question to me was, do you think God will take me back? And my answer to him was, I can't guarantee anything.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna tell you, yeah, go out and do that, and then the Lord will take you back. And my statement, I said, will you want to come back, is the question. And so that's just kind of like a real world situation where there are people that do that. They just kind of lose, they do lose their passion or whatever, and they just go off. And is there a guarantee? Well, I would not want to be the one who gives that guarantee. Well, yeah, you haven't lost your salvation. Just kind of live it up, and then the Lord will take you back. And so I think just kind of like on the ground level where, rubber hits the road, that's not necessarily, something that I think God's mercy and his grace is so much wider and greater than we can ever think of. But that was just kind of something that made me think about that when he just gave me that answer. And I think it kind of scared him a bit because he didn't do that. And I was grateful for that.
Yeah.
And, but yeah.
Yeah, the Bible really gives no promises of hope or consolation to people who knowingly disobey God and sin. It really doesn't. Like, for example, I'm talking about these early churches and making this offering of incense to Caesar. Well, I mean, this was a big controversy in the early church because there were some people who, under threat or under duress, they would be like, I'm just going to do it, and then I'll ask God to forgive me, because they're literally being threatened with death.
Right.
And some people were like, yeah, God will forgive you. But there were many people at the time who said, well, I don't think that we have any promise of that, right? Like, I don't think that we can guarantee that. And it's very similar. One of the questions I really get a lot, I got it when I was doing the radio thing. I get it here. What about Christians who commit suicide? And it's almost like people want me to tell them, if you commit suicide, it'll be okay. God will still take you. Now, I am inclined to give hope to those who have, in a moment of struggle, given into that.
Yeah. So dealing with clinical depression and things like that. Yeah.
But in no way would I ever give anybody a promise that says, go ahead and do it. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I can't give that promise. And I think that should be something that people take very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could point, I heard somebody say this once, that different passages in the Bible are spoken. If you look at the audience to whom they're spoken to, that's a really important part of how you use and interpret that verse.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, to the people in Hebrews, the letter to Hebrews written to these group of people, and these people were thinking about abandoning Christianity, going back to Judaism because it was too hard to be a Christian because they were facing persecution, ostracization, those sorts of things. So it's easier to just go back to being Jewish, and that'll be fine. Or maybe I'll believe in Jesus, but I'll keep it to myself. And to that, the writer of Hebrews gives no promise that that's going to be okay. In fact, he even says those who've tasted the holy gift and yet gone back, there is no more sacrifice for you, right? You have trampled on the blood of Jesus. That's very sobering. But to the person who's like, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, there's so much patience, so much help. And, to a smoldering wick he won't snuff out. A broken reed he will not break. And, yeah. So.
And Josh has provided us with a bunch of scriptures.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to what you were talking about. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's the one from Hebrews 6 about those who've tasted the heavenly gift, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Appreciate that. I mean, that's the idea, is just that, for those who are knowingly considering sin and thinking that they'll use God's grace as a license.
Yeah.
No way. There's no promise, no hope given to that. But to those who have sinned and are repentant and wish they had never done it, yeah, there's tons of hope.
Yeah, no, that's great. Super. Well, let me just dive into this question here, since we're just kind of dealing with end time stuff, and then we'll kind of move on. But what should we take away from the fact that the USA does not seem to be mentioned in Bible prophecy?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the conclusions that some people make is that maybe the USA will cease to exist. I don't know. I don't think that that's the only natural conclusion of that. I think it's just that these events are taking place in the Middle East. names of ancient civilizations are used to describe movements that are going to take place. I don't think there's any real problem with this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it means America's demise necessarily. But I also don't know if it means that, America is going to be a major player in those events. I don't know. So
What do you think it says about, because many people look at Revelation as pure, we talk about historical kind of a history, or the genre that was actually written in was like apocalyptic genre. And I think people who kind of more take the historic approach maybe kind of say, well, U.S. is not in there. And then those who come with kind of apocalyptic approach to the genre itself would say, well, just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So what do you think that's kind of maybe mixing those two things, or not understanding the genre the letter was written in?
Yeah, I mean, okay. I don't know how much we want to go into this.
Sorry, I might have opened a can of worms.
Okay, here. I'll just give you this, okay?
Yeah.
There are three main views of Revelation and the other, what we might call end times prophetic writings in the New Testament and the Old Testament. And those are, we call them preterist, idealist, and futurist. Let me explain what those mean. Preterist means that the majority of the writings, if not all, but at least the majority, have already been fulfilled in our time. That is already taken place. That's the preterist view. The futurist view says that the majority, not all, right? Because we might look at like Matthew 24 and say, well, some of those things it seems did happen. Okay. So we would say the majority, though, is things that have not yet taken place and are going to take place in the future. And then you have the idealist view, which says that these things are more like cyclical, right? It's more like big picture. It's like a painting where not everything represents something concrete per se, but it just represents the fact that there's this war of evil against good, and good is going to win in the end. Jesus wins in the end. That's the point. And there are these certain cycles, that take place over time, and they take place with different empires, different countries that rise and fall. But at the end of the day, the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our God, and he will reign forever and ever. And so along with those three views also comes a focus on the nature of the book of Revelation. Because here's what's interesting about Revelation. It is three things at the same time. It is a book of prophecy, so that generally refers to the future. It is apocalyptic in nature, and it is a letter, okay? So different groups will focus on those different things, right? So especially the preterists, they'll focus on the fact that this is a letter. And sometimes they'll focus on a prophecy, though that requires them to argue for an early dating of Revelation, which I don't hold to. I don't think it's actually, it's historically not the view that the earliest Christians who were closest in time, like a generation out, gave for it, etc. So the preterist view tends to see it primarily as a letter. The idealist view tends to see it primarily as apocalyptic. And the futurist view sees it primarily as a prophecy. Again, at the same time, all three groups do view it as having elements of those three things. It is a letter, it is a prophecy, it is apocalyptic. It's just which one you emphasize over the others will be determined by and will determine the primary view that you take of it. So I primarily take a futurist view. But I like the out of Dallas Theological Seminary, there's a view that was what was his name? Something Bach. Darrell Bach.
Darrell Bach, yeah.
Wrote a great book called Progressive Dispensationalism, which, by the way, has nothing to do with progressive Christianity. It just means that the dispensations progress into each other, and there's some overlap, and they're not just like hard lines. So I thought this was a good view, and I think it takes away some of the things which I find as weaknesses in the classic dispensational view. But the point is primarily futurist. And so to your point, though, are they misinterpreting apocalyptic text? Well, I would just say very few nations are named at all in
Yeah.
Revelation. We know that there's things taking place in Jerusalem. Jesus talks about that in Matthew 24, Jerusalem, the surrounding area, though there's some debate over what that even means.
Yeah.
And if that is speaking about that time which is to come or a time which was much closer to his time. So I don't really think that we need to draw any conclusions of the fact that the United States is not mentioned by name in any Bible prophecy.
Yeah, and just a final thought on that. I mean, this might not be popular with a lot of Americans, but I think America maybe has too much of self-importance when it comes to being mentioned in Revelation, because as you study missions now, it says 2/3 of all Protestants live outside of Europe and North America. And most of what's happening, new evangelical movements and new things within Christianity are happening southern hemisphere, and God's doing amazing things. And America and North America and Europe is kind of drying up, even as many as they're sending out missionaries and things like that. So
yeah, we've got a lot of comments. I want to read some of these.
Go for it.
So I like Josh's comment there. He says few countries are named in Revelation other than Babylon, which Babylon is not even speaking about the country like the ancient Babylon, right? It's a reference or an archetype of the evil world system, which is set up opposed to God. Babylon the Great, is or Babylon is referred to in 2 Peter as referring to Rome. I mean, so, and can Babylon refer to New York? Can it refer to America, the West? Can it? I'm sure, yes.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, I think it's even bigger than just like that. I think it's the world system which is set up in opposition to the will of God. And yeah.
So, no, it's great.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah. Patty had one. She quotes here Matthew 24 saying, "Watch out that no one deceives you, because you'll hear wars and rumors of wars. Such things must happen, but the end has not yet come." And she mentions fear causes people in America to still want to be found in Revelation. Not me. Oh, I don't think it's fear that causes people to want to see America in Revelation. I just think it's a question. Like, is America going to be around at that point? First of all, I don't know the answer to that. And secondly, I don't think that Revelation really indicates one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I would agree. We should be about doing the Father's business, no matter where we are. And I think you have an effect in your community, and that spreads. That's our desire here at Longmont, is to do what we can with what God's given us, and our desire is to see that spread. And we'll see what happens with that.
Ocean says he's heard many theologians say that Babylon could be a restored Babylon, like in Iraq, like northern Iraq.
You can hear, it depends on who you're listening to. There's a lot of books written about those things. Yeah, whole series of books like Tim LaHaye.
Yeah, this is what I always point out about Revelation. One of the difficulties with understanding the book is the question of the fact that it is apocalyptic, but it's not completely apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And so here's what you got. You got a book full of symbols, but not all the symbols are explained, and not everything's a symbol, right? Like it's not symbolic that Jesus has a message for them, right? But some of the things in the message are symbolic. So that is, and so I think that you would make a mistake if you overinterpret or impose something. And this gets to a much deeper question, which is about theological method, which is how do you determine what you should do? And a lot of times what happens is that people aren't just reading the Bible, they're imposing things into the Bible. I could give you an example of this. In one of the historical view of viewing Revelation as eras, there's this whole thing in the second letter of Smyrna about you're going to, the devil is going to put you in prison for 10 days. And then there's all these people who are like, well, 10 days. Listen, if you're going to take it literally, right? Which is like a person who says, well, it must be a revived Babylon because I take the Bible literally. But then the same person will say, well, they're not just going to be in jail for 10 days, but the 10 days refers to 10 years, or they'll say the 10 days refers to 240 years, which is the time of all the Babylonian emperors. Or they'll say 10 days, a day isn't just a day and it's not just a year, but it actually refers to an emperor.
Mhm.
Suddenly now we're no longer taking the Bible at face value. We're trying to interpret based on what? Like, you're really at that point, it's like kind of like making stuff up. And that's really what people need to
It's
watch
a
out
Christian
for.
Numerology.
There you go. Numerology.
Numerology. That's what
Yeah.
numerology. Christian
No, we're big fans of
numerology.
pneumatology.
Yeah.
We love the
Yeah.
pneumatology,
Sorry.
not
Yeah.
so much the numerology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Numerology. Yeah. So, hey,
Yeah.
Ocean, send that question again. Sorry, it's
Well,
all the way up at the top.
I
Did you
remember
unsend-
it.
Oh,
I
you do?
remember it.
Okay.
Yeah. Here. So, just to wrap that one up, Ocean, personally, I'll just give you this. Is that I don't expect a revived Babylonian Empire in Iraq to be raised up. Personally, I would say that's an example of somebody failing to understand an Old Testament allusion that's also used to refer to something that's not literally Babylon elsewhere in the New Testament. I mean, that, to me, that's a failure of interpretation.
Mhm.
I don't expect to see a literal Babylon. So
Yeah.
there you go. Okay.
Do you remember that question?
Yeah, his question was this: was the serpent in the garden a dinosaur?
Well, we know it probably had legs. I
Hey,
don't know.
Mike, what was Adam's favorite color?
I wasn't there, so I'm not quite sure.
I feel like those are similar questions, right? Like,
Yeah.
was it a dinosaur? I don't know. How do I know?
Yeah, what's Leviathan? You know, there's a lot of things we're not sure. It all
Yeah.
depends on how you interpret the word serpent. You know, we know he spoke. We know
Yeah.
he was very smart. And so, I mean, people have kind of extrapolated out that animals spoke back then because the serpent spoke, but then Balaam's donkey spoke, and most donkeys don't speak. So, I don't know. That was one of those things I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer.
Yeah, I have no idea, nor do I. I don't even think it's a good idea to like posit a view on something
Yeah.
for which we have no information
Clue.
whatsoever.
And does it really affect what we're about as far as gospel ministry and things like that? I mean, we want to be asking the right questions. I realize those people do spend a lot of time with that. They write a lot of books about it, but
Well, I actually know where this question came from. It came from somebody who's maybe reading the Bible for the first time, and they were wondering that question. So I mean, I don't think it's somebody.
No, I take that. Yeah, that's
This is
good.
good. Somebody just reading the Bible and wanting to know. So all that to say, I don't know. We don't know, and you can add that to your list of things that you're going to ask when you get to heaven. I have a long list of those kinds of things, so just put it in there, and hopefully you can ask it when you get to heaven.
You want to keep asking the ones that our listeners are throwing up there?
Yeah, let's go. So Josh said, I think it's referring to earlier when we were talking about Babylon, right?
Right.
That John says he's not Elijah, but then Jesus says he came in the spirit of Elijah. Yeah, I agree. Babylon doesn't have to be literally Babylon. It can be,
Metaphor, in a sense,
something of the spirit.
Yeah. Kind of
metaphor that,
Yeah.
Okay, Patty asked, does the Bible say that an increase in technology is a sign of the end times? Yeah, there's a thing in Daniel, right, which talks about how at that time, like, knowledge will increase and movement of people will speed up a ton.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people have taken that and they've said, well, knowledge will increase. Knowledge leads to technology. Technology increase is a sign of the end times, which, well, of course it is. I would agree with that. I mean, as we move further, let's put it this way. Every day that we live, we are closer to the return of Jesus.
Yeah.
And every day that we live, technology is advancing. That was only not true for maybe the Middle Ages and the fall of Rome, which led to the Middle Ages, maybe did see a decline in technology, right? Like some technologies were essentially like people moved from being in urban situations to being more rural situations. There was maybe a plateau or decline in technology, but not wholesale, right? Other parts of the world, like China, they were still making lots of technology. And so as time goes on, we should expect to see more technology. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think it's part of the cultural mandate that we have in Genesis chapter 1 to subdue the earth and to manage it, use the resources of the earth for good and for human flourishing, and I think that's okay. Technology can be used in good and bad ways, right? Like it was really hard to cut bread when we were just using that rock, but now we got a knife and it got easier, and that helped human flourishing, and going on and on. But you could also use that knife to hurt somebody, right? And so how we use technology matters greatly. So technology itself is not good or bad. What human beings who are innately flawed do with that technology matters greatly. And with every technology, there comes new opportunities to abuse things, and humans will figure out how to abuse them because of our sinful inclination. So but anyway, that's where that comes from. It comes from the book of Daniel. Knowledge will increase, human movement will increase, and we do see those things in our day and age. And every day that Jesus tarries, I expect that we'll see more of it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And even Jesus' time, I mean, technology was on the uptick big time with Roman building the roads. The technology within the Roman world had, with hot and cold running water. And then, of course, you talk about China. I think sometimes the barrier was just communication, that they were just so far away.
Yeah.
And then you think about the Enlightenment and, the focus on science. There was a big uptick there. Industrial Revolution, big uptick there. And now we're in the kind of robotics, AI revolution. And I mean, personally, I've been kind of fascinated. I've been looking into the theology of robotics, and how AI and robotics are going to change how we view human beings.
Yeah, kind of transhumanism
and all this kind of stuff. Because, it's one thing if you throw a toaster out the window or you beat a toaster with a baseball bat. But if you are hitting something that looks human, but it's robotic, what does that do to your perception of other humans? It's a fascinating dive into. But, technology is, I mean, since the last 100 years, I mean, what is it, like every 10 years, it's doubled our technology. So it's pretty,
it's definitely speeding up.
Speeding up. Yeah. So that's great. But as to your point, what do we do as Christians with that? How we have more ways to communicate the gospel, more ways to go, more assets available to us than any time in any place, in any era or dispensation to go and preach the gospel. So for us, we should take it with all joy and do what we can, in this moment.
I just I heard a theologian recently, and they were talking about how a lot of people really have focused historically on the fact, Galatians 4 says that at just the right time, God sent his son into the world, and focus on like how the time in which Jesus was born was uniquely geared towards the spread of the gospel. And this person pointed out that, well, yes, but also those same elements that made Christianity able to spread throughout the world also persecuted Christianity. And I think that is really interesting to think about in light of technological developments, right?
Yeah.
The same technologies which can be used for spreading the gospel more widely and broadly can also be used for bad things. They can be used for persecution. They can be used for the spreading of false teaching.
Yeah.
A great example of this week, there was a theologian on
Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And they're saying that this might be the largest platform ever for this guy arguing for the reliability of the Bible. And I mean, I watched some clips of it. It was awesome.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other stuff that goes out every other week on
that Joe Rogan,
that are not helping
all,
people to follow Jesus. So it kind of goes both ways.
So
we want to use those technologies for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you got some questions up there? Yeah. All right. So let's dive into. Here's a question: what is progressive Christianity?
Okay, progressive Christianity. I wrote down some notes here. I'm going to read some. So it's a movement that emphasizes. Let's do this. Say reinterpreting traditional Christian doctrines and teachings to align with contemporary cultural values. That would be my definition. Now, they've chosen the word progressive because there is a progressive movement. And you could ask, was that a political movement? Yeah. Is it a social movement? Definitely. Right. And so it's all of those things. And so it's basically people trying to reinterpret things that have been believed by Christians historically to fit with modern, what is the word I'm looking for? Like ways of thinking,
Modern societal norms, I would say.
yeah, expectation, all that
Expectation,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what was another thing? So, for example, they're reinterpreting things like love, like what does love mean? What they would even reinterpret some things like, famously, like, well, do we really need the virgin birth? Or should we really take what the Bible says at face value? Or should we try and reinterpret it? And this has been going on for quite some time, by the way. This isn't new.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can even just think within the last, I mean, if you want to go all the way back, let's go back to the things that were happening amongst the early church, where you had Gnosticism, where you had people who believed Greek philosophy, and they're trying to make Christianity fit with their framework, their philosophical framework that they already believed. In other words, I already believe this. Now let me see if I can make Christianity change a little bit or change it in order to fit with what I already think. That was what was happening with Gnosticism, which is like First John and some of the other epistles in the New Testament are directly combating that. Then you can go through history and you can see other examples of that, where it's like there were these cultural things that were going on, and people tried to change Christianity to make it fit it. And one more example of that would be like the 1800s. There was this whole thing about rationalism and the Enlightenment, like you mentioned earlier. And so what did you have? Well, you had these high German critics who came and said, well, when the Bible says that there were miracles that took place, well, we know, they said, no, that miracles don't work because everything follows a scientific method. So therefore we must reinterpret the Bible. Right. And so we often refer to this as like theological liberalism. And there's been many forms of it that have cropped up over the years. This was the thing that the church in Ephesus in Revelation 2 was commended for, that they didn't tolerate this kind of stuff when it was happening. Okay, so then now we have our form of it today, which is matching modern progressive liberal thinking and trying to basically change interpretations of texts that have been interpreted a particular way, understood by Christians for thousands of years in one way, trying to change it in order to make it match the cultural thing. In other words, trying to make the Bible match what the world says. Some people have called it like baptizing, the world's thinking.
Right.
And the problem is that this never ends well. Like for these groups, it never ends well for those who get on board with it. Yeah. So when I talked about theological method earlier, I mean, part of it is like, how have Christians throughout history understood this passage? And, if you're going to take a different view, you better have a really good reason, and it must be biblical. It must be, yeah. So all that to say, yeah, I think it is compromising biblical truth for the sake of cultural accommodation. And I don't think that we are not a progressive. We don't adhere to progressive Christianity. I think that progressive Christianity is going to end up on the trash heap of history, and that's where it belongs.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I would add, I think for me, progressive Christianity is the removing of truth.
Oh,
Like
Patty asked me this: are you a progressive Christian, Nick? No. Are you? I said many podcasts ago, I would never associate with that. What I said though is that there's this thing from Darrell Bach at Dallas Theological Seminary. He wrote a book called Progressive Dispensationalism, which I always say, every time I say that, I'm like, couldn't this guy have thought of a better name for this thing? Because it's like too much baggage with that word progressive, right? Yeah. What he's talking about is a way of progressing through dispensations, not anything that should be mixed up with modern progressive liberalism. That being said, I don't adhere to progressive Christianity. I don't like it whatsoever. And and Darrell Bach is a very conservative theologian as well. The point is, every time I say that word progressive progressive dispensationalism, I'm always like, this has nothing to do with progressive
Yeah.
Christianity or anything like that. All right. Patty understood. Glad we shake hands. All right, good.
So yeah, no, totally agreed. And I think we also need to be careful with even it's subtle within the charismatic church or within the evangelical church where we are, taking on things like, new age thought. And then we case it in the idea of we are recapturing something that the world has taken from us. And that can be a subtle way you can see progressivism in the church is kind of this idea of we're going to take these things from the world and we're going to, as you said, try and incorporate them into church. And I think New Age thought is one of those ways that, it's a trap for a lot of evangelical Christians that they're falling into. So
we've only got 10 minutes left.
Only 10 minutes. Well,
we could be like Joe Rogan and talk for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Hey, Josh said something cool. Yeah, he talked about how on Joe Rogan they talked about P52, which is a codex,
Yeah.
And this guy, did you see that where he like recreated himself by making his own parchment? And then it was pretty cool, actually. Yeah, you should check that out.
Okay,
yeah.
I haven't seen it. So, but all right. So I did not propose that.
I know that, Patty. It was proposed by a lady named Harriet, who often sends in questions ahead of time. Harriet, if that was your question, I hope that our answer was clear.
Yeah, and just on progressive, one of the kind of core things of progressive Christianity is they do not hold the Bible.
Yeah,
with
it all starts with that.
They don't have. It's not authoritative in any way. So society is authoritative, but the Bible's not, and the Bible is. It says some good things, but basically, when you boil it down, the Bible's no longer an authority in their lives. As far as that's kind of been when I've done a deep dive into some progressive thought and things like that. The Bible no longer holds any weight with them as they need. They will take from it, but as far as I will adhere and submit to it, no. So
yeah. Josh says progressive Christianity is an oxymoron.
Yeah,
I agree. I have nothing good to say about it. Yeah.
So and I agree with you. I think it's going to be on the trash heap. I mean, it'll be replaced by something else, but sadly. So I do have here. So let's dive into this one. It should be fun. This should take up at least our next 8 minutes. This is also from Josh. He gave us this question. Doesn't 1 John 2:2 clearly refute limited atonement? If John didn't mean every person, why would he say whole world, cosmos? If he didn't mean every person, is there another Greek phrase that we see him use in the New Testament that more clearly expresses all people on earth? Does cosmos ever reflect elect or saints in any other passage in the Bible? Great question, Josh.
That's a great question. And I did a small amount of research. I'll just give you a few things that I found. And I found them actually quite interesting. All right, I'm going to read to you from 1 John 2:2. I think I can recite it from memory, but I'm just going to try and make sure that I don't get any word of it wrong. All right, here's what it says. 1 John 2:2. He, Jesus, is the propitiation, meaning a sacrifice that propitiates the wrath of God for our sins, and not for ours only, but for the sins of the whole world. Okay, so here's the thing. There's a doctrine. It's one of the 5 points of Calvinism. It's the L in the TULIP acronym, and it is limited atonement, which means that Jesus, when his blood was shed only for the elect, and his blood was not shed for those who are not elect. Okay, that's the limited atonement. Yeah. That's what it means. Now, in this moment, I'm going to explain to you why people argue for limited atonement. And I think it's a good reason, but I think that this verse, see, the problem is you might have a great rationale behind it, but the problem is that when verses of the Bible contradict your rationale, then you got to rethink things because, or at least, you got to go back.
Yeah, your system has to be tweaked a bit.
Yeah, because I'll get into that in a second. Okay, let me just answer the question. Propitiation for our sins, the our they're referring to believers, assumedly, right? That would be another question for those who espouse that view is like, who's the our? Is John saying like him and his friends? And then the whole world is the world of the elect. That's how this
Mhm.
this is often interpreted by those who espouse limited atonement. Okay, so he says, not only for our sins, but also for the sins of the whole world. And the word that's used there for world is the word cosmos,
Mhm.
like yeah, it's a Greek word for world, which refers to the world as whole. Now, Josh's question is there any example of the word cosmos being used to refer to a subset of
Subset,
people
yeah.
rather than every person in the world? The answer to that, Josh, is actually maybe, but not necessarily. Okay. So the verse that those who espouse that view would point to make that case is in John 3:16. Sorry, John 3:17. Let me just read to you from there. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." Now here's verse 17. "For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world." There you have the word world used twice. Once talking about the world geographically.
Mhm.
The other one, again, it's the word cosmos. I believe it's in both times it's used. He did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Now that's the tricky one right there. Now let me read verse 18 because I think it matters here too. "Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God." Okay. Now, those who agree with limited atonement, right, what they would say is that this is an example of him saying he didn't send his son to condemn the world, but some people will be condemned. In other words, he sent his son to save the world, but not everybody will be saved. Therefore, they would argue, here's an example of the word cosmos being used to describe a subset of human beings in the world, not every human being in the world. Now, I'll tell you why I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's the point that Jesus is making here. I don't think he's trying to get down to that granular level. I think he's just talking in general. People in the world. God didn't send his son for the condemnation of the world. He sent his son for the salvation of the world. However, not everybody's going to be saved. Only those who believe, and those who don't, they're already condemned. So I don't think that this is I just don't find the argument compelling or conclusive at all. I think it's really grasping at straws, personally. Now, yeah, Josh says cosmos is never positive as in saints or elect. Okay, so here's the other part. You asked the second question, Josh. Is there ever a time when another term is used that we can look to describe every person? The answer to that is yes. In 1 Timothy 2, verse 4, where Paul says that God, our Savior, desires all people to be saved. And the wording there is in Greek, pantos, if I remember correctly, I wrote it down, pantos anthropos, which means all. That's the word pantos, all. Anthropos, human beings, people, individuals. So there you have an example of God's desire that every person would be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So hope that helps. The answer to the one question, I actually agree with you. I think that 1 John 2:2 does disprove or
refute
limited atonement. And I also think that, yes, there is another term that's used, and it's found in 1 Timothy 2:4, pantos anthropos. Okay.
Yeah, great answers to those questions. Yeah. So, do we have time for one more? Do we have any follow up here?
We have two. I think we had one more question I wanted to answer.
Okay, do you want to talk about the water baptism one?
No, I didn't know we had one about that.
John the Apostle.
Yeah.
Is that the one you want to talk about?
Next time.
Next time. All right.
I got a quick one.
Okay,
The
go
one
for it.
about the true Israel.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. What does the term true Israel mean?
Yeah, really interesting, because in the letter to Smyrna, he talks about those who call themselves Jews, but they're not Jews. They're of the synagogue of Satan. What does that mean? Most likely, in context and considering history, what we know is that there were Jewish people who were accusing the Christians of, basically reporting them to the government and getting them in trouble because they didn't like them. And he says, these people, they claim to be Jews, but they're not even true Jews. And what does that mean? Well, it means and we know this from, I wrote down the passage here, or I got the passage here. Where did I put it? Romans 9, 6 through 8, and Romans 3, towards the end of the chapter. I forget which verse, might be 28, but I have to look at it. The point is that there are several passages in the book of Romans, maybe several. There are more than one passage in the book of Romans, which makes this point that not everybody who is descended from Abraham is a true Jew. In other words, you might be ethnically Jewish, you might be culturally Jewish, but if you are not a person who actually follows God, then you don't count as a true Jew. And this is the point that's made in Romans 9, verses 6 through 8, which we could look at. You got it right
It's
there?
not as though the word of God's failed, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his offspring. But through Isaac shall your offspring be named. This means that's not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as offspring. For that is what the promise said.
Yeah, what I would want to qualify this, you got to read that in light of chapter 11 of Romans, which says, has God forsaken his people Israel? By no means, right? And so that's we're not, this does not the same thing as like a replacement theology or a theology that says that God has cast away ethnic Israel. But it does mean that not everybody who's ethnically Jewish is part of that group. So all right, thanks everybody. Hey, I got a question for you, those of you who have made it this far. How do you like Mike being part of this? Because I like that Mike's part of it. I might have other people do it with me sometimes. It makes the time go by easier.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll probably get more comfortable trying to answer questions off the top of my head.
So in the comments, if you want Mike back, you got to just let us know. Okay. Well, wait till you see his other jackets. Do you have other jackets?
I have other jackets. Yeah, they tend to be more Southern Hemisphere. Shout outs to South
cool.
African rugby.
We love those guys. Hey, Will likes it that we're together. All right, Will.
All right, Will.
All right. See you later.
All right. God bless.